Hello, hello, everybody. What a beautiful film, right? And one beautiful, incredible performance. So please give a warm welcome back to the stage, Joel Edgerton. And Clint Bentley. Wow, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and it's kind of appropriate to be here where you have redwoods around you too. You know, it feels really such a special movie. And I know that you two had a connection also with the book itself. Could you talk a little bit about what that connection, when you first read the book, and what resonated with you when you read it?
I first read the book, it was gifted to me. I think there's certain books, particularly novellas, I think, that get passed around for a reason. And I think someone had gifted it to me, maybe knowing that I would find something in the book. And I think the first thing that really grabbed me and really hooked me was the kind of Robert's guilt and complicity in the incident with the Chinese worker, and how dangerous and complex that scenario was. And then I was really, really into the book. And by the time I finished, I thought that I would like to inquire about the rights of the book. And they were taken. And I sort of put it out of my mind. But at the same time, it always stayed with me. And I knew there was an interesting film in there, but it was a complex thing to turn the book into. It's not an immediate kind of you read it and go, this is a movie, like just turn it into a screenplay. And then Clint reached out to me years later and it felt like he somehow knew. Of course, he didn't. But I was in love with the book. Knew, yeah. Clint's all-knowing.
Of course.
So, yeah, I had a connection previous to this and then, thank God, this guy came along.
Mm-hmm. I first encountered the book when it came out, when it was published. I think I saw it it was on all the lists that year, and there was a big Pulitzer debacle where there were 3 books.
And none got it.
Yeah, this was one of 3 books that were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize, and none of them got it. Which some reviewer was reviewing this book and writing about Denis Johnson and said that was the most Denis Johnson thing that could happen to him at the. Yeah, I read it at that time, and it was just was a book that stuck with me. And it really and I think for those of you who have read it or the people who have read it, it seems like people fall into 2 camps: either they've never heard of the book or they love it deeply, and it just stuck with me. And I thought about it it's one of those rare ones that just bubbled up from time to time. It started a lifelong love of Denis Johnson's writing that I kind of read almost everything that he wrote after that.
Well, the tale is timeless. When you watch it right now, even though it's set, there's a theme that it applies. Would you say that was something that you experienced while you were making it and while you were reading the book?
Yeah, 100%. Once it came to this place where some producers had the rights to the book, they had seen Jockey, my previous film, and asked if I would be interested in adapting it. And at that point, I went back reading it, and I was struck by that it felt like, even though this guy was living in the early part of the 20th century and was a logger and all this stuff, there was something that felt very universal about it, and I felt very connected to it in terms of this person who feels kind of out of step with their own time that they're living in. I remember turning 28 and feeling like an old man already in terms of technology. Right. And that just only seems to accelerate as we go along. And so I felt like, well, if I feel this way, I'm sure other people might as well. And I've been struck by how universal the story is, not only in terms of age, but also in terms of culture. Our cinematographer, Adolfo Veloso, he is from Brazil. now lives in Europe, but really like travels around, and he really connected with the story and talked about how much he connected with this story of just somebody who kind of doesn't have a home, you know, is always kind of moving around for work.
And Joel, your performance is just so subtle, and everything, just like your body gesture, just a simple body gesture, your face expressing so much. You've been on stage and have done stage performances. This is such an interior performance. Could you talk a little bit about crafting that, making the character of Robert?
There is something challenging about, you know, there's something pleasurable about being on screen and not having to say too much. Not because I'm lazy.
Because you don't have to learn lines. That's nice.
But it really focuses you in a different kind of way. And, you know, particularly Robert is a very kind and gentle and honest character. And you know, there's not a lot of kind of sharp angles to him. But that was a challenge too. And he's also not a protagonist that is sort of pushing, you know, with his foot on the accelerator and his hands on the steering wheel of his own life. It's the opposite. He's really kind of absorbing the blows of the world around him and events. And that was a challenge as well. But what I trusted in was Clint and Adolfo's work and how they were going to capture the information, but also knowing there was a narrator who was there to fill the gaps of what would otherwise be potentially dialogue or scenes from Robert, and allowed me the chance to trust in the patience and the stillness, and that hopefully by a certain time, audiences, like the film itself, have learnt the language of how to read certain expressions and certain things and understand what Robert might be feeling as a blank canvas, that they might be feeling it for themselves as much as I was feeling it. I'm really interested in the fact that when Robert's first real expression of his grief for his family, the thing that he says first is, "I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me." And I think that some of the most dignified people I've ever met in my life are people who talk very little, and when they do, I really want to listen to them. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of trust in it, and knowing that I was in very safe hands.
Well, and also that Robert has, you become him in that time period. And how everything, like when you walk around with an axe, there's like a scene where you hold an axe. And I've seen people hold axes, and it looks like you've done this for a long time. Could you talk about preparing for that?
Yeah. My kids now have nightmares. I've been walking around for a year with an axe. Look, I feel immediately comfortable in that environment. I definitely did the physical work to make sure that, I wasn't turning up on set and go, "Oh my God, what's that long wooden thing with a sharp end?" Some of the more interesting things actually was about how does life and grief wear the body down? You know, we had this great passage of time to work with, which I marvel still, even though I was inside the film, at how we get to travel such a long period of time. But in those later stages too, of how does that work affect the body? Because I don't consider myself too old, but I'm certainly not young. But for those final scenes of how does Robert move and how's his spine holding up, and those things I found sort of more of the challenge than chopping a tree down.
And creating that authenticity of that time period, what would you rely on photos? How were you putting it all together to create that period so authentically?
Yes. I'm a research hound, and I really get excited about finding out the difference between what Bonners Ferry looked like in 1920 versus 1940. Bonners Ferry, Idaho, where this is the little town where this is set. So I love that, but also there was an aspect at a certain point where I wanted to let go of it, because I didn't want it to be, I wanted the film to feel like a memory of a person's life rather than a catalog of a life. And so not thinking, I didn't want the audience sitting there thinking, oh, now we're in 1935, and what happened in 1935? Oh, now we're in 1942, and there's a war going on, and all of that. And so I had the good fortune of working with an amazing production designer, Alex Schaller, and an amazing costume designer, Małgorzata Tarzanska, who were really like, we talked through those things, and made sure that things are period specific to a point, but not getting too caught up in it. There's also something very interesting about like what feels period specific to an audience is not necessarily what is period specific.
Right.
And so there were a couple of times where there were like there's a magazine that burns up in close up in the film when the cabin's burning up, and the first things our amazing prop master Andy Wirt, he brought in these magazines and they've got bleach white paper, and I was like, my guy, we got it, like it's from these things are from 1920. He's like,
right.
No, they were actually whiter back then than they are now because of the bleaching process. And I was like, all right, well they don't feel that way, and so we have to like,
right.
It was just an interesting thing of just calibrating it along the way.
Well, you also you talked about this just a little bit at the intro, filming in the wilderness, and actually going. That's your set. What were the challenges with that? What was exciting about doing that?
I think it's different for every member of the crew. Like an actor, I mean, an actor can turn up to work in their pajamas.
Right.
I don't have to carry any equipment, you know. Being out in those environments was very special, you know. In all honesty, the building of the cabin, that cabin could function as a real cabin and you could live out there, you know. So I think all those things go a long way to the feeling you get on screen, despite whether or not that was a, you know, two-dimensional set or not. For us, I think it brings some authenticity to it. And that was across the board, and being able to walk into these sort of prehistoric environments. But yeah, for the crew, having to carry equipment in there was also a real concern, because while we're chopping down trees, and you know, needless to say, no trees were harmed in the making of this film, because Clint and the team took such care to know that I think there were 2 or 3 trees that we did fell that were marked on certain properties. They were already sort of marked for felling, or they were, you know. Yeah, there was a lot of care and attention around it. So carrying equipment into those forests as well, there was a lot of care and attention. Yeah, for me, it was such a pleasure.
For me as well, I think like that's, and Adolfo and I, we'd worked together on our last film, Jockey, and with that one, it was just a 13-person crew running around on a racetrack in this very documentary fashion. We were trying to figure out a way to bring that up into this larger film where you've got a period film and you've got all the, you know, much bigger crew and all of that. I think one of the first things that we did was we were filming in the spring, we were catching the trail into the snow. We wanted something in the snow. And so we have those sequences where Grenier is walking through the snow. And that was the first thing that we shot, actually. And we took this guy up, and with no real script or anything, just like kind of making scenes as we went along. And it was really like, we just stripped everything down, got up on the top of this mountain and started filming in the snow. And it was really like, it was tough, but everybody, it just really invigorated everybody into like what we were seeing and what we were getting, and everybody starts to help out at a certain point. You know, it's not like, oh, you carry cables. It's like everybody's picking up things and pulling them along. And so it really not only, I think when you're in places like that, it gives the actors something to really chew on of being authentic to that space. In the scene in the movie, Joel is like really having trouble lighting a candle or the lantern, lighting a match, because there's a snowstorm happening around him, and he's actually like, his hands are frozen. But it kind of invigorates us all into the process, and we're like, you know, we're all kind of in it together.
And Robert's story, we don't see this portrayed very often. It's you know, we usually hear about somebody who has, it's more heroic in a different sense, but his story is in and of itself heroic. What he's survived through, and come out through. Could you talk about doing this, making a person who is not in...
Yeah, no, it was very intentional from the beginning. It's what struck me about the book and what I wanted to carry into the film was that it's this heroic, epic tale about a man who wants to have a nice life with his family. Right? He doesn't want to go off and fight in some big battle. He doesn't want to go off and change the world in some big way. And that, I think, it's close to my heart. And it's something that I think is really important to remember of how valuable it is and how wonderful it is if you can just have a nice life, right? And that's a good life. And that is all of us lead epic lives and fall in love and we fall out of love and we lose parents and we have tragic moments and every person leads a very epic life, even if we don't do anything that somebody makes a statue for or a plaque about in the end of it,
And that he contributed to history, right?
Yep.
His part, you see the testament of what he did from being in the railroad and all that, Could you talk about working together, collaborating on this? So, because it's your films that you've done in the past, and your films too. It seems like a really good union between the two. Could you talk about working, what you learned from each other, what you admire about working with each other?
I really had such a wonderful time on this film, thanks to Clint. I think when I first met him, I had this instinct that he was going to do something very special and that I really trusted him and that he was collaborative but not a pushover. Meaning I could offer up thoughts which he invited me to give and he would listen, but he wouldn't immediately go, oh yeah, because I was his actor that he should agree with me. There was always a thoughtfulness to the process, and the film was the king, and that the story he knew very well, and that anything that serviced that to its benefit, he would absorb, and anything else, he would have a very articulate reason as to why not. Then when we were working on set together, the one thing I will say is I've never seen such a harmonious union of a director and a cinematographer together. Adolfo, who you know by watching his work, is very special. And they make each other more special because Clint gives him the... there's a certain confidence in letting somebody have the reins.
Right.
Whether it's an actor or art director or anyone, is to trust people to do their job well, but to also be looking over things with a careful hand or careful eye, which is what Clint does. And he is very careful at constructing emotion and knowing how to calibrate it, which means a lot for an actor too. There are lots of conversations around where because we're dealing with some heavy stuff here, but we don't want to oversaturate the audience with my grief, because I think this movie is a chance for other people to remember their own grief and remember the joy that is the foundation for that grief.
Right.
So to find the right ways to build that story. So I mean, I could keep you guys up all night talking about how I love Clint and how I'd love to do it all again. But I think the work speaks for itself, and I'm just very proud to be a part of the film.
Very nice.
Thanks, Joel. I said a lot of nice things earlier. I think there's a couple of things I was thinking about earlier in terms of stories from set. One is I mentioned earlier, there's an unfussiness to Joel, and at times, like I said, he was trudging through the snow and laying in the mud, and there was nothing I would ask him of hey, do you mind doing this? And he'd be like, yeah, totally, why not? And I forgot at a certain point that, this is very difficult for him. He's doing an accent and he's crying for a dead family and all this stuff and acting with chickens. and I need to like remember that this is actually difficult
Right.
because there's a real unfussiness, and yeah, I feel like if I could have like made a great actor in a laboratory, like
Right.
it would have been this man here.
Yes, yes.
And so I just felt very, very lucky to be part of that.
Well, you look at some of the films that you've done too, Joel, when you think about Loving, which is such a beautiful film too, and it's character-driven, and you do supremely subtle work that strikes a chord. Boy, Erased, when you actually directed and wrote, did that film at a time right now that we need it probably even more so. There's such a great curiosity that you have and the ability to tap into human elements that a lot of people can't, or actors who don't, in such a subtle way.
Thank you. I said it earlier about this film that, I owe my kids and my wife
Right.
for a lot of that performance because, what I was saying about grief being something that I think is okay for us to be reminded of. I think I have an affinity for or an interest in the softer edges of human experience that, when I was a young actor, I was like, I want to do all these tough things. And I just did a prison movie in Australia and I really tuned it up to 11 and a half. And, I'm not all subtlety.
Right.
And I love the experience of breaking out of
Right.
those, I like the whole spectrum of it. And I gesticulate and I'm too loud in public, but on screen there's a chance to really distill things. And for this film, it really, this is a nice challenge of playing a character who I would like to meet more of.
That's exactly.
I'll just leave it at that. I just wish there were more Roberts in the world, given what we see.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so true. One final question, because I know we're going to have to wrap up. You came up with this voice-over narration. You found a perfect person to do it as well. When you were going through the writing process, when did you decide you want to do the voice-over narration? And for you, Joel, how did that help you with your performance?
Yeah, I love the narration as well. When Greg and I first started writing the script and adapting it, I found pretty quickly there was something missing. And going back to the book, there's a magic to it. The book's only 117 pages, and yet you feel like you've lived this entire life and this entire time. And part of that is Denis Johnson's voice. And those turns of phrase, he has these turns of phrase where like in 2 sentences you have 5 years pass, Right. And there's a humor to it that I wanted to bring in. And so that felt like something that was like missing when we were just kind of starting it as like a straight ahead, like this, without a narration, straight ahead like script. It was missing that magic. And so then I thought back to like, okay, well, you don't want to do like a shitty narrator that's just like, and then he was sad. And so like I thought back to like Jules and Jim and Y Tu Mama Tambien and these great narrators that's in Days of Heaven, where you have these like amazing narrators that actually are telling you a story. And so then that became the thing where I was like, okay, let's make this narrator like, if you're at some logging bar in Idaho and this guy's had 2 beers, he starts, let me tell you about Robert Grenier. And he starts telling the story, and then he's going to start talking about a comet for some reason at a certain point. And so it just gave it a way to like keep it playful. But also, the other thing that it allowed, and Joel can speak to this, but like, it was really important from the beginning. I was thinking about like my grandfather or even my father, who were men of very few words, who didn't really have the vocabulary to express what they were feeling inside, and yet they were feeling very deep things. And so trying to get across a character who's got a deep current running through him and is feeling very deep things, but then can't say I'm sad right now or whatever, or I'm feeling the grief of my lost family. And so having a narrator who can say that. And then lastly, like the voice, Will Patton narrated the audiobook of Train Dreams. And it was also a close friend of Denis's. And so we were tweaking the narration right up until the very end of the edit, until like the last day that we had to stop, our editor Parker and I. And then we like, thankfully, Will said yes, because he's just like perfect. He's got a sweetness to his, well, you know how good of a job he did. I don't have to tell you. So yeah, it all worked out.
Yeah, and just as Clint said, it became an assistance. It was like my Scottie Pippen. You know, it just helped me, you know, guide the audience at times through Robert's journey, so that Robert didn't have to be untrue to who he was and speak too much to things that he normally wouldn't articulate. And I thought that I think it's so special. It's not a very easy thing to make work. I think in a film too. You know, I see some films that really work with narration, and other films I think it's unnecessary. It helps also sort of create this sort of, you know, beautiful godlike view of the world too, because for me the film says so much about, you know, how lucky we are to be alive. You know, to get into the mire of, you know, of your pros and cons of your life, looking back of, all right, these good things happen and these bad things happen, but yeah, it was all kind of worth it. The film also, in its own way, in its own talk of the interconnectedness of everything in nature, and our connection to the, you know, our soul's connection to the trees, and all. For me, even beyond that, it talks to just how fortunate we even are to have a life.
True.
And therefore, you know, to then expand that to, you know, what do you do with that fortunate life you have? And how do you move in the world that you are connected to? And the narration somehow helps me view the movie in a way that I can look at it from inside and from the outside.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, beautiful film. Thank you both so much. I have one other thing to mention is that Joel is also producer of a film that's playing here too. So tomorrow night, go Wednesday, it's The Plague. We were talking about it just a little while ago. It sounds really fascinating too. It's at 6 p.m. here. So you probably, if you can get tickets, get tickets. So thank you two so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for staying.